A 55-year-old female by name Lakshmi, who is an agricultural laborer residing at Palasa, came with the chief complaint of tingling and numbness of lower limbs and abdomen since 3 months and difficulty in walking since 2 months. Sir, am I audible, sir?
Yeah, audible and visible.
History of present illness. Patient was apparently normal 3 months back. Later, she noticed tingling and numbness, which is insidious in onset, which started simultaneously in the both feet, progressed upwards up to the level of Zippy sternum over a period of 1 month. Tingling and numbness is more in the right lower limb than compared to the left. There are no aggravating or relieving factors for tingling and numbness. She is unable to appreciate mosquito bites, feel clothes on her body, differentiate hot and cold sensations. She noticed tight band-like sensation at the level of Zippy sternum. Cotton wool sensations are present while walking and wash basin attacks are present. There is no funicular pain, no root pains and no vertebral pains. No sudden shock-like sensation down the back or arms on flexion of neck. 1 month later, she had history of fall in bathroom due to slippage on wet floor. She got up from the floor with support of wall. Since then, she is unable to walk without support. Went to a local orthopedician in view of right knee pain, advised bed rest for the period of 15 days, took treatment and got relieved of pain. The fall was not associated with headache, vomitings, reeling sensation, loss of consciousness, involuntary movements of the limbs. Lower limb weakness is sudden and non-progressive since 2 months. Weakness is more in the right lower limb than compared to the left. She noticed difficulty in gripping chappals and difficulty in climbing upstairs and downstairs. Difficulty in getting up from squatting position. There is no difficulty in combing or reaching higher objects. No difficulty in buttoning or unbuttoning. No aggravating or relieving factors for weakness. She is able to roll on her bed comfortably. There are no involuntary movements. After the fall, she noticed increased in severity of tingling and numbness, as like previously, right compared to left, up to the level of Zippy sternum. There is no urinary frequency, urgency or hesitancy, and no urinary retention or dribbling. There is no stool incontinence or constipation, no postural dizziness, palpitations, or excessive sweatings. There is no history of loss of smell, no history of visual disturbances or blurred vision, no history of double vision or drooping of eyelids, no history of difficulty in chewing food. She can appreciate sensations over her face. No history of deviation of angle of mouth or slurred speech. No history of nasal regurgitation of food. No history of difficulty in swallowing, difficulty in speech. No hoarseness of voice. She can manipulate food balls in the mouth. No history of swaying while walking. No slurring of speech. No involuntary eye movements. No headache or vomitings or seizures. No history of cough, night sweats, evening rise of temperature. No history of weight loss or loss of appetite. Past history, no history of similar complaints in the past, no history of diabetes, hypertension, pulmonary tuberculosis, cerebrovascular accidents, coronary artery disease. History of hysterectomy 15 years back, indication of menorrhagia. History of surgery to the left ankle joint 3 years back due to fall. Personal history, she is married and had 2 children. She takes mixed diet, sleep and appetite is normal, and bowel and bladder habits are normal. Family history, no history of similar complaints in the family, no history of pulmonary tuberculosis, diabetes, hypertension, cerebrovascular accidents, coronary artery diseases in the family. Summary, 55-year female patient with ascending type of progressive asymmetrical sensory involvement, paresthesias in the form of tingling and numbness from bilateral feet up to the level of Zippy sternum over the period of 3 months, and non-progressive weakness of lower limbs, right greater than left since 2 months, without significant bowel and bladder, cerebellar and autonomic system involvement. My provisional diagnosis is compressive myelopathy at the level of D6 spine, which is intradural and extramedullary, maybe secondary to the tumor compressions.
Wait a minute.
Yes.
Let us discuss what you have presented till now.
Okay.
Go back to slide 1.
Chief complaints are tingling and numbness of the lower limbs and abdomen and difficulty in walking.
Okay. Next one. What is striking? Don't read the whole thing. Just tell me the salient observation on this slide.
Sir, tingling and numbness initially started in the foot and progressed to the level of xiphisternum, sir. That is ascending type, sir.
Okay.
And there is asymmetry, sir, right more than left, sir.
Okay.
Loss of sense.
But there are sensory symptoms. There is some amount of progression. It is insidious in onset. It is bilateral and it is asymmetrical.
Yes, sir.
Isn't it? So
Yes,
this is the answer that we got in the two slides. Bilateral, asymmetric, probably ascending, sensory symptoms related to the lower spinal cord, not cervical. Okay.
Yes,
next one.
Here, band-like sensations and cotton wool sensations indicating posterior column involvement, sir.
Okay. Xiphisternum is what level of the spinal cord?
Sir, sensory is D6, sir.
Okay. Okay.
Next slide, sir.
You said wash basin attacks are present.
Yes, sir.
But then later on you said there are no cerebellar signs.
Yes.
Right? Is it going together? Or no sensory? It could be also sensory ataxia, isn't it?
Sensory ataxia, yes.
What is the difference? How do you differentiate from the history or your so-called wash basin within quotes attacks about the cerebellar and the sensory? How do you differentiate? How do you differentiate?
Other cerebellar signs, sir.
Leave alone other cerebellar signs. Just by the type presentation of ataxia, how do I say it is sensory? How do I say it is cerebellar? What are these wash basin attacks? Describe them.
Sir, sir, how do we ask, sir?
How do you assess that, and what is the interpretation?
Sir, while cleaning her face near the wash basin, she closes her eyes, sir. So
while cleaning the face in the wash basin, what do? You close the eyes, right?
Close the eyes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. So there is ataxia with closed eyes. There is no ataxia with open eyes. That is what is meant by wash basin attack. When the person is able to manage the balance, the eyes are open. Okay. And when the person is not able to manage the balance or equilibrium and the eyes are closed, wash basin attacks are present. So how do you differentiate sensory and cerebellar based on this particular test?
In cerebellar and opening eyes also, she complains of ataxia, sir. On sensory ataxia only while closing.
Exactly. Why? Can you tell me why? What are the three systems essential for equilibrium? Three inputs are required.
Cerebellar, vestibulocerebellar.
Okay.
Posterior column.
Okay. Oculovestibular. Isn't it?
Oculovestibular.
Yeah. What happens is when a person has got sensory ataxia, he is not able to get the proprioception from the joints, from the feet. Then he tries to compensate with the visual input. That is called the oculocerebral and oculovestibular, oculocerebellar and oculovestibular connections. So what happens is when the patient washes the face, obviously they close the eyes. When you close the eyes, what will happen? The ocular input is cut off through the vestibule and through the cerebellum. and the ataxia is precipitated. Whereas in cerebellar, whether eyes open or eyes closed, the inputs are there from the periphery as well as from the vestibule as well as from the eye, but the cerebellum is not able to coordinate. So the problem is central, whereas in the other cases it is called peripheral. We call it as peripheral vertigo. Peripheral ataxia is sensory. Central ataxia is cerebellar. Central ataxia manifests even when the eyes are open. Peripheral ataxia is precipitated when the eyes are closed. You understand?
Yes.
This is how you should have a clear-cut idea of what you are saying. Cardinal sensation present, wash basin attacks present. What does it mean to me in this patient? That's important, isn't it? Okay, go ahead.
Yes.
Next. So this tells there is a sensory ataxia too in this particular patient. Wash basin attacks means sensory ataxia, also called peripheral ataxia. Okay, next one. Next slide.
She had history of fall, following
Okay.
which she complained of motor weakness.
Okay.
Mostly
It's a
proximal.
very significant event, right? Somebody falls and develops motor weakness of the lower limbs or whatever it is, then it's a very important point, because the lesion could be traumatic, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Let's go ahead next.
Next, symptoms are sensory symptoms are fall. There are no associated fall features of fall, sir. No vomitings, headache.
Shall I change it?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, what are salient features in this slide?
Sir, weakness is both distal and proximal, and it is non-progressive, sir. And increase in severity of sensory symptoms after the falls.
Okay. Now, these are negative findings. So no
Yes,
bladder involvement, no bowel involvement, and no postural dizziness. What is postural dizziness?
Sir, for hypotension, sir, postural hypotension.
That's different.
Yeah,
She is having postural ataxia. If she stands and
Yes,
closes the eyes, she gets ataxia, right? So
Yes, sir.
don't get confused between ataxia and dizziness. Okay,
Yes,
these are all negative findings to say that there is no cranial nerve involvement, right?
Yes, sir.
So you are trying to pin down that the lesion is not in the cranium, but below in the spinal cord. For that reason, this is useful. Any statement we make must have a utility. And this is how this slide is useful for us. Next, this is again the swaying while walking, slurring of speech. This is again central. Okay,
Yes.
past history, no similar complaints, no TB, CVA, CVD. Hysterectomy, does it have to do anything with the present problem?
No, sir.
Why? What for she underwent hysterectomy?
Menorrhagia, sir, she complained.
Menorrhagia, okay. Suppose it is a tumor.
Yes, sir. Metastasis.
Then possibility of a metastasis. But generally, uterine cancers metastasizing to the bone is comparatively not that common. Okay. Family, no problem. So summary, this is what you have in the summary. Now I ask you one question. What are red flag signs? You know this? You know or not?
Yes, sir.
Red flag signs are symptoms, rather. Red flag features. Why is it important to know the red flag features?
Sir, any significant bowel and bladder involvement, any traumatic?
No, you are not aware of the red flag signs of a spinal disorder. Many patients walk into our chambers with back pain. Not everyone should undergo MRI or CT myelogram and anything. We have to filter them by what are called the red flag signs. What are the red flag signs? Causes of back pain and risk for spinal cord compression overlap. The back pain may be due to any reason. Spinal compression also overlaps with that. So general red flags that should prompt consideration of a spinal imaging include age more than 65, new onset gait instability, sphincter incontinence, use of steroids, midline pain, presence of spinal contusion on examination. That is the pain on the, on examination of the spine. Okay, note down these things. Age more than 65, new onset gait instability. Okay, suddenly the patient is having gait instability. Sphincter involvement, either bladder, usually bladder, sometimes bowel. Steroid use, midline pain. Pain in the midline, not okay, in the midline of the spine, and presence of tenderness when you examine the spine. This is about the traumatic. So these red flag signs should prompt you to go for imaging. Yes. You said that she went to some doctor and he prescribed rest analgesics. That is exactly where you are. You should not do that. And the patient is presenting with red flags. Where is the question of rest and analgesics and wait? Let me see after 3 months. That doesn't work. You have to do an imaging. When there is no red flags, you should not do imaging. Waste of money and resources are very scanty. For that reason, you must understand who should go for imaging, who should not, who can wait for imaging. Not that the other group should not go for imaging, they can wait for imaging. So the group who has got red flag signs must have the imaging as early as possible. Okay, now repeat the red flag signs.
Sir, age more than 65 years, new onset gait instability, sphincter involvement, mostly bladder, and usage of steroids, and midline pain and tenderness.
And then tenderness on the spine.
Tenderness on the spine, sir.
In addition, if you are thinking of cervical cord syndromes, there will be weakness affecting the arms and legs or both. This is motor symptoms. Okay. Yes, in addition to the sensory things which we have seen, there is again motor symptoms also out there. If you have motor symptoms pertaining to legs as well as arms and weak motor, particularly not pain in the joints or pain in the hand, motor weakness. If you say motor weakness, then you have to look for imaging. These are all the signs. For example, in the signs, these are all the symptoms. In the signs, what are my red flags? So you divide them, red flags in the symptoms, red flags in the signs. In the signs, there is hyporeflexia, there is a dermatomal sensory loss, there is fine motor control is difficult, and then upper motor neuron findings like hyperreflexia, Babinski, in the lower extremities, gait disturbances while you are seeing your wash basin attacks, and these are. And there is one thing called the Hermit's sign. What is the Hermit's sign?
Hermit's sign, sir.
L is silent. L, you did not pronounce that L. It's called Hermit's sign. Hermit's sign.
Electric shock-like sensation that runs to the back and arms when there is flexion of neck.
Electric shock-like sensations in the neck or in the back radiating down from the spine down to the arms. How do I elicit it? Supposing the patient doesn't have it, can I elicit the Hermit's sign?
No, sir.
Yeah, you can elicit it by forward flexion of the spine, and also while asking the patient to do Valsalva or coughing.
Yes, sir.
Okay. How to elicit Hermit's sign? Ask the patient to bend forward, flex the spine, Hermit's sign will come. And the second thing is ask the patient to do Valsalva or do coughing or sneezing. Immediately the pains will come. Okay. Now group the red flag signs into two, those related to the signs, symptoms, those related to the signs. Why am I interested in this? because I need to do imaging immediately with these things. If these are absent, every back pain, I don't have to do imaging because we don't have the resources. They can wait. And if the disease progresses, then of course we reassess them. For that reason, all the PGs, please note down, you will be definitely asked when you have a spinal case, they will ask you when you image the patient. They will not ask you red flags. Do you think that the patient should be imaged immediately? Supposing I ask, then, sir, this patient has got red flag signs. Show naturally. What are red flag signs? Signs and symptoms. So this you have to understand. What is Hermit sign and how to elicit the Hermit sign. Okay. Now, this particular patient went to a doctor. Dr. Cooley said, go and take rest, come back after 2 weeks, take these pain tablets, which is not correct. She presented with red flags and she must have been imaged on the same day. What happens if you don't do that? The disease could progress in the next 2 or 4 weeks and then it may be difficult to treat. So we don't want to waste the time. Okay. So let's go ahead to you present the examination part. So what are the learning points in the history part? So we understood what are wash-basin attacks, what is sensory ataxia or peripheral ataxia compared to the central ataxia or the cerebellar ataxia. We also knew what are red flag signs, what are the symptoms of red flag symptoms, and what is Hermit sign, how to elicit the Hermit sign. These are your learning points of today's discussion so far. Let's go ahead.
Yes.
What is striking in this?
Sir, there are no significant, sir.
Nothing significant. Okay.
She was.
What is very much grossly important on this? Okay. Patient has these symptoms, but the temperature is 101 persistently over 3 or 4 days or a week. Then will it change my diagnosis?
Like tuberculosis. Spots.
101 fever. Which tuberculosis you will get 101 fever? Low grade evening range of temperature is a long duration temperature is the problem of tuberculosis. Somebody has got 4 or 5 days chills, rigors, fever 101, presented with acute motor weakness of the lower limbs and sensory changes. What could be the reason? What could be the reason? Huh?
Transverse myelitis.
Transverse myelitis. It can have little fever. Anyway, keep that in mind. If the patient presents with fever, acute onset, there is a set of diagnosis. I'll ask you to classify that. Then we will come to it. It is called SCA. Okay. What is SCA? Spinal epidural abscess. SCA, internationally accepted terminology. SCA. SCA is spinal epidural abscess. That presents like that. Okay. So what is the learning point in this slide?
Higher mental functions are normal, indicating no cerebral involvement.
Get the slide and make a statement. We can read what is there.
Yes, higher mental functions, right-handed individual, memory,
cranial nerves. Okay.
Yes,
now, what is this? Why are the upper limbs? Last time also that lady presented adduction at shoulders, extensor at the elbow and wrist, forearm pronated. These appear to be the same slides continuing. I doubt very much. That is not the case.
Okay.
What is this adduction at shoulders, extensor at the elbow and wrist, and forearm when your diagnosis is around D6? What business it has got to do something with the shoulders? Yeah, I think probably the old slide is copied here as I guess because I see the type of presentation, slide outlay is also the same. Okay, you have to keep in mind whatever you write, you should be able to explain. Otherwise, be very careful while writing that, and then you keep a query why it is not and re-examine the patient. And then multiple lesions are possible, one in the thoracic level, one in the cervical level, then your diagnosis is going to be very different. Okay. Now, what does this tell? Right.
Sir, bulk is bilaterally symmetrical and there is no wasting, sir. In the lower limbs, extensor hypertonia.
Which particular spinal diseases are associated with wasting?
Sir, motor neuron diseases.
I see gross wasting in the lower limbs or upper limbs, whatever it is, my diagnosis is shifting from one to another. What is that?
Sir, element type or any motor neuron diseases, radiculopathies.
So there are two types of lesions. Lower motor neuron is possible, upper motor neuron is possible. Wasting is a feature of lower motor neuron involvement. Wasting is not a usual feature of upper motor neuron involvement, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
Wasting occurs very late in upper motor neuron because of disuse atrophy. Otherwise, there's no business for the muscles to waste. When the anterior horn cells or the spinal roots are involved, then there is a chance that the lower wasting will occur very, very early. Okay, there is no wasting. So that means you don't have any anterior horn cell involvement or the root involvement as it appears. Now you wrote something extensor hypertonia lower limb. What is extensor hypertonia? What is flexor hypertonia? Let's have a very clear idea about which muscles are doing what. Did you hear of extensor digitorum longus, extensor digitorum brevis?
Yes, sir.
There, what are those are the muscles? Flexor digitorum brevis, the flexor, interossei, adductors. Okay. Lumbrical. Okay. Go down. Okay. So what happens is when you say extensor hypertonia, you bring in a question by yourself. You are inviting a question by the examiner. Classify the extensors of the lower limb. Then you will be, you can say hypertonia and leave it there. Extensor hypertonia means immediately what diagnostic difference it has got. Okay. Don't invite new terminology there and get into new areas of, unless you want prompt that question and then answer and then be smart. That is a different story. Okay. What does this tell? This slide.
Sir, in the upper limb, power is normal, sir, 5/5.
No involvement in the upper limb. Okay.
Yes, sir.
In the lower limb also, everything is 5/5 except hip.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, that means in hip also what particular muscles are involved, you have to say. Is it power of flexion at the hip or extension at the hip, adduction or abduction? Okay.
Flexion, extension, adduction, and abduction are 4/5, sir. All group of muscles in the right.
Well, all that means what segments of the spinal cord?
Sir, flexion by iliopsoas and gluteus maximus. Flexion by iliopsoas and extension by gluteus maximus, and abduction is by gluteus medius minimus and tensor fasciae lata.
Okay.
And adduction is by adductor longus brevis and magnus.
Okay. Well, some certain spinal segments, L2, basically is around the flexion part, and the extension is again the S1 part, right? So that you have to remember. Now, what are these things? Right and left superficial, absent, abdominal absent, extensor plantar, biceps, knee exaggerated. Okay. We did not get any muscle involvement at the knee in the power, but the reflex appears to be exaggerated at the knee.
Yes, sir.
So how do we explain that? Okay. Sensory.
Touch pain. And the upper limbs is normal, and in the touch pain, temperature, vibration, and joint position sense is impaired below the D6 sensory levels.
That means what? All the sensory tracts are affected, right?
Yes, sir.
Touch pain, temperature goes in one stream. Vibration and joint sense in the posterior columns. So if both the groups of sensations are affected, my lateral as well as the posterior part of the spinal cord is affected. Is it only one side or both sides?
Both sides.
But you have not written that.
Yes, sir. Both sides.
You have to write that. Unilateral or bilateral is symmetrical loss and asymmetrical loss. You have to write. Cortical sensations cannot be tested. Why?
If primary sensations are not tested, we can't test for cortical sensation.
If the primary sensations are present, then you can test the finer sensations. The primary sensations themselves are impaired or lost, then you cannot test the higher sensations. Isn't it?
Yes, sir.
What is Romberg's positive?
Sir, trying to patient stand and tell her to close her eyes, sir. There will be swaying.
There is ataxia and closing the eyes.
Yes, sir.
Swaying and closing the eyes.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, that is Romberg's positive. You can also do something like this. You can ask the patient to stretch both the arms like this. If there is a sort of weakness on one side, that arm drifts, or if both the arms also will drift. This is again related to the joint sense. So how do I keep my arms like this if I want to keep? Because of the joint sense, I know where this is and also try to match it. So if that sensation is lost, then the drifting of the arms will occur. Okay? This is called hand drift, which you can test when there is involvement of the upper limbs also. Not in this case, but in general, when there is a cervical cartilage. Okay? The third thing is a tandem walk. What is tandem walk?
They have to walk in only straight lines.
Then what happens?
For balance.
Yeah, a patient will have ataxia when you ask him to walk on a straight line. Okay? So something like this. You just ask the patient to, with eyes open only, and then you ask them to walk like this. Okay? One foot touching the other. The toes of the foot should be in contact with the heel of the foot that is brought forward. Okay, so that is how you do the tandem walk. Tandem walk is positive. If there is with eyes open, it is all right. With eyes closed, somebody cannot do, then of course sensory. Eyes open itself.
No, sir. Tandem walk in truncal ataxia.
Truncal ataxia can be brought out by doing the tandem walk test. Okay. Now, cerebellar signs intact, autonomous intact, meningeal irritation not there, skull and spine no deformity. Okay, respiratory nothing wonderful, cardiovascular. Okay, perabdomen non-tender, no organomegaly. Okay. Diagnosis: anatomical D4, pathological compression myelopathy due to tumor, radiological diagnosis, probably that one, and then etiological. So intradural extradural is also radiological. So now you have to clinically say how the intradural differs from the extradural or intradural, extramedullary, extradural, intradural, and then vertebral, and then nerve root. Okay, so you have to make a differentiation. Sagittal section of the MRI. Can you read the MRI for me?
Sir. Slide. Sir, slide not seen.
Not seen. Everybody is seeing. Can the other pages see? Dr. Sudhir Garu, good morning, sir.
Good morning, sir. Good morning.
Kanapadutunnada meeku slide?
I'm seeing.
Yeah.
Diagnosis slide is there.
Which one? No, I have changed it. You refresh your screen. Okay, I will unshare and reshare it. Don't worry. Now,
Sir,
can you see?
sir, it is loading, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Can you see the MRI?
Yes, sir, I can see, sir.
Okay. But read it for me. You should have some basic idea of reading the MRI and CTs. Maybe Dr. Sudhir will arrange one session for MRI and one session for CT. Some basic
sir.
reading,
We'll do it.
spine, skull, these things. Now you tell me, what did you find?
At the level of D4 and D5, homogeneously enhancing lesion is
I'll show you that. See here? Can you see the indentation here?
yes, sir.
The spinal cord is impinged by the. I'm not able to write anything on this because. Okay. So this is the indentation there. So there are two types of investigations, right? One is an MRI. The other is, what is the other modality which you can use?
Previously, myelography.
CT myelogram.
Yes,
Do a CT and inject a dye and see the myelogram. CT with myelogram. In MRI, you don't require a myelogram because MRI itself delineates the spinal cord very clearly. You don't require a myelogram in MRI. CT, if you do, you have to do a myelogram, which is a better test. MRI, of course, for this particular disease, MRI is the gold standard. The gold standard test is MRI. MRI is the gold standard. If there is a contraindication to do MRI, then I have to do a CT myelogram. What are the contraindications to do an MRI?
Sir, any implants, sir?
Any?
Implants or metallic implants? Like
patient is wearing pacemaker, you cannot send him. Metallic implant, you cannot send him. Relative contraindication. What is relative contraindication? Did you ever take an MRI for yourself?
No, sir.
No need. Did you ever see any patient being taken MRI?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, this is what is called claustrophobia. You are put in a chamber. Tick, 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 sounds from all sides. Takes 15, 20 minutes, you have to lie down. And not like CT, CT, the acquisition of images is like taking an X-ray, a little more than that. In about 2-3 minutes, the entire study is over in CT. In MRI, you have to lay still, you should not move, you have to be in the chamber, you have to bear the sound. This is a headache. Unless there is an indication, patient will not like the MRI very much. So what is the impression radiologist has given?
Sir, relatively well-defined homogeneously enhancing intradural and extramedullary T1, T2 ISO and hyperintense lesion measuring 1.7 into 0.9 centimeters with right foraminal extension noted at D4 to D5 level, displacing the cord to the left. No evidence of cord edema, likely schwannomas.
Okay. So that is why they did not do a myelogram here. The radiologist rightly did the MRI and then commented on the MRI, and there is no myelogram is indicated because already the MRI itself will tell the story. If some CT has been done and myelogram is omitted, then of course you have to do a CT myelogram.
Yes, sir.
Now, I will share some presentation for you and some learning points are there. Yeah. So when we are dealing with the spinal cord story, what we have to know is, first of all, localization of the level of the lesion. Second thing is, what type of pathology is this? This also we would like to know. So there are what is called plegia, paresis, monoplegia, quadriplegia, hemiplegia. I told you what is diplegia last time. And then, the next thing is spinal anatomy. Also, we discussed last time conus medullaris and which jerks are involved, involving which segments, and how to elicit those things. We discussed last time when the other lady doctor presented the spinal case, and we also looked at which muscle testing related to the which segment. This also I showed you. Supposing I ask you, please test L1, L2, L3, then what test you have to do? Please test L5 and S1, then what test you have to do? This is the way you connect the test with the segment and segment with the test. Both you have to do. Okay. Then this we looked at last time in detail, and also, superficial reflexes, deep reflexes. What do they mean? And tendon reflexes also, depending on the spinal segment. So tendon reflexes, spinal segments, you must know. The sensory arc, you must know. This also we have discussed. Now today, this also I told you the dermatome distribution about the various sensations like that myotome. Dermatome chart and myotome chart you must have in your mind. Okay. Now, this is how we have to test the Romberg with my patient. I think testing, cotton wool temperature and then pain and vibration test, those things. Now, this is important. I just wanted to recapitulate this for all of you. Look at the spinal cord. This is the anterior part of the spinal cord, and this is the posterior part of the spinal cord. And you have the SLTC. S is sacral, L is lumbar, T is thoracic, C is cervical. So in the posterior columns, the sacral is the medial most, and the cervical are joined from the side. Whatever is joining from the side, they take the lateral, this one. Okay, and these don't cross here. They cross in the medulla. They don't cross here. Whereas the lateral corticospinal spinal tract, this is again the S is the most lateral, L, T, and C is the most medial. I told you why. Because these tracts cross at the spinal segment. The cervical on the other side just crosses and becomes more medial, and then the thoracic cross, and the lumbar crosses, and the cervical crosses the last. So you have the distribution differently. There is SLTC in the case of the posterior columns, which are uncrossed fibers there, whereas CTLS is the order when you are looking at the crossed fibers, which has the lateral corticospinal tract. And this is the pyramidal tract. Pyramidal tract is the motor tract. And again, C is the innermost, T is next, and L is outer. Why? Because when the motor neurons are descending, the upper motor neurons, the cervical ones are pushed to the medial, and then come the thoracic ones, and then come the lumbar ones. And this is the anterior horn, and this is the posterior horn. From here, the dorsal nerve root, from here, the ventral nerve root will emerge. Okay. Now, go to the next one. Okay. You are talking about epidural and all. You understand what is epidural and where are we?
Yes, sir.
Okay. This is the spinal cord. This H-shaped is the gray matter, anterior horn, and then the posterior horn there. And this is the anterior horn, and this is the posterior horn. Sorry, this is the posterior horn, and then this is the boundary there, the dura, epidural space, subdural space, okay, pia, and then this is the root formation. The anterior root and the posterior root join to form the dorsal nerve root. So this we understand. Then let us go to the So this correlation also I showed you. The spinal cord is shorter than the vertebral column, and there is a correlation. For example, D12 vertebra corresponds to L5 segment, and D11 vertebra corresponds to L3, L4, like that. Okay. This also bladder we will take up separately. One day we have to discuss the bladder innervation and the diseases associated with the bladder. Okay. Now from here, clinical approach to the localization of spinal cord lesion. So what are the things that I look for? First of all, does the patient have spinal cord lesion? In this case, yes. Then if so, localize the highest level of motor, highest level of reflex, highest level of sensory, highest level of autonomic. In this case, what is the highest level of motor?
Sir, D6, sir.
No. What is the highest level of sensory?
Sensory also D6 level, sir.
Any reflexes?
Sir, abdominals are large, sir. Then we can say the lesion is above T8.
Correct.
Most probably.
Autonomic not involved.
Not involved.
To identify then the intramedullary or extramedullary, radiologist will give the diagnosis. But yes, before he tells you, you should have clear idea whether it is intramedullary, extramedullary, or extramedullary extradural. Okay. Localize the corresponding vertebral level also, because spinal level and vertebral level do not tally, and we have a previous slide which tells us which spinal segment corresponds to which vertebral segment. And then, of course, the etiology has to be tested. Okay. Intramedullary lesions will have these features. All of you please note, intramedullary is something like this. Okay. It's not visible. I will use the red color. So that is the intramedullary. That is, this is the spinal cord, this is the gray matter, and something from within is expanding in all directions. Then what does it cause? Dysesthesias and paresthesias, dissociated sensory loss. Why? What is dissociated sensory loss?
Loss of pain and temperature in the same side, and touch is preserved, sir. Preserved.
Yeah, this happens because once you are from within, it is expanding outside. The cord compression is rather not uniform, and all the sensation carrying fibers are not uniformly compressed. That results in dissociated sensory loss. Sacral sparing present. Intramedullary lesions, usually sacral segments are not affected. Spastic paraparesis, not prominent. Intramedullary lesions. Why? My spastic paraparesis is related to this, the corticospinal tract. And my lesion is intramedullary, and we will not be getting a spastic paraparesis. Muscle atrophy is common because intramedullary obviously involves the anterior horn cells of that particular, those segments, 2 or 3 segments, or whatever is the involvement, and lower motor neuron features will be present. Trophic changes will be present because of the muscle weakness and because of the muscle atrophy and because of the loss of sensations. Bladder disturbances occur early if the lesion is lower down. The lesion is cervical, we don't get. The lesion is lower down, where the bladder innervation arises from the lower spinal cord. There, of course, the bladder and bowel disturbances are a feature. Note down all these things. Dysesthesias and paresthesias, dissociated sensory loss, sacral sparing, no spastic paraparesis, atrophy is common, trophic changes are common, bowel and bladder disturbances will be early if it is lower down. Does our patient have these things?
No, sir.
Yeah, no dissociated sensory loss, no spastic paraparesis, and then spastic paraparesis not prominent, of course, in this one. Our patient has got some muscle weakness. There is spasticity in the form of exaggerated jerks, and there is extensor hypertonia, and muscle atrophy is not seen here. There are no trophic changes. There are no bladder and bowel involvement. So our case is not intramedullary.
Yes.
This is how you have to have a very clear idea. Definitely you will be asked. No doubt about it. If you get a spine case, if you don't have the answer to intramedullary, extramedullary, extradural, you will have a lot of trouble. in getting through the examination. These you have to print in your mind, these slides. Okay. And then next, extramedullary. Extramedullary means like this, what I have put here. Something compressing, from outside is extramedullary. Then there will be root pains, segmental wasting, spastic paraparesis because of the corticospinal involvement. Bladder and bowel symptoms occur very late because bladder and bowel innervation is bilateral and it is more central and not peripheral. So root pains are a feature. This patient doesn't have root pains or not?
No root pains, sir.
Yeah, she has some, band-like sensation, things like that you were telling.
Yes, sir. At the level of xiphisternum, she complained.
Yeah, Hermit sign also you have to elicit for the root pains and segmental wasting. Is there any wasting is seen in this patient?
Sir, no wasting, sir.
Yeah, not much. Spastic paresis, to some extent, yes, it is there. Hypertonia, bladder and bowels are not there. Maybe extramedullary, but then we have got one more level. Now, this is how this table all of you should have in mind. What are these things? Clinical features of extra and intramedullary tumors. Extramedullary and intramedullary. Sensory, motor, bladder, trophic. Divide them into 4 parts. Sensory, motor, bladder, and trophic changes. Always you have to write your sheet in this fashion. And you want, when a spinal case comes, you have to write, these are my sensory findings. These are my motor findings pointing to this diagnosis. These are my bladder findings. These are my trophic findings. Extramedullary, sensory, root pains. And then here there is no root pain in the intramedullary because root is very much outside. Extramedullary roots are outside, they can be compressed. Okay. Funicular pains, that is intramedullary when the funicles, the cauda equina and the funicles are compressed, then you can get a funicular pain. Progression of paresthesia is ascending in case of extramedullary, it is descending in case of intramedullary. Is this ascending or descending our patient?
Ascending, sir. From the foot to...
Sensory loss dissociative, present in intramedullary, absent in extramedullary. Sensory loss dermatomal, present in extramedullary, and then not present in intramedullary. You can locate, okay, this dermatome D6 level onwards, this is there. Like that, you can fix a dermatome in extramedullary, which is not in the intramedullary. Sacral sparing, absent in extramedullary. Sacral sparing is there in case of intramedullary. Then motor, LMN signs, diffuse lower motor neuron signs in intramedullary, segmental only in extramedullary. Extramedullary, if there is a compression at C5 or D6 or L1, only that segment you have LMN signs. Whereas intramedullary, because it is from within, the entire tract is compressed and it is diffuse. Appearance of upper motor neuron signs, extramedullary compression, corticospinal tracts are lateral. So naturally, very early you get it. Whereas in case of intramedullary, it has to expand from the center of the spinal cord to the tracts, and it is rather late. Bladder disturbances very early if it is low down like cauda equina in intramedullary. Upper lesions of intramedullary, they will not have bladder lesion, bladder involvement. Extramedullary, bladder symptoms are rather late. Trophic changes absent in extramedullary, they are present in intramedullary. Now, with this table, what are the positive features in your case?
Sir, she didn't actually complain of root pain, sir, but tight band-like sensation at the level of xiphisternum, she complains. Okay. And there is ascending type of paresthesia, sir, progression. Okay. And there is, sir, no dissociative loss and segmental sensory involvement is there, sir. And no sacral sparing, sir.
Okay.
And UMN signs are present, sir. No bladder disturbances and no trophic changes.
So with these features, with this table, you can rather say before the radiologist tells you, okay, my lesion is not intramedullary, it looks like extramedullary. Clinical features of extradural lesions. Extramedullary can be extradural also, isn't it? That's yes, what you are telling now here. Is it extradural you said or what?
No, sir, intradural I have said.
Okay, you said intradural. Suppose it is, so this extramedullary means outside the spinal cord substance. So outside the spinal cord substance is extramedullary. Still, it can be within the dura. It can be outside the dura. If it is within the dura, how it looks like, we have seen extradural, all features of extramedullary and spinal tenderness, spinal deformity, paraspinal spasm will be associated. It looks like intramedullary only. Sorry, extramedullary intradural only. Now for extradural, you have what is called spinal tenderness, spinal deformity, paraspinal spasm. Are they there in this particular patient?
No, sir.
Yeah, that's why we are not diagnosing an extradural lesion.
Yes, sir.
Keep these things in mind. And you know what is Brown-Séquard syndrome, hemisection of the spinal cord, and it's related. So we will probably discuss them at a later stage. I have a few more learning points for you, which I would like to show you. Okay. I'll share this article also with you.
Okay, sir.
I told you about what did I tell about the red flag signs? I told you, isn't it?
Yes.
So what are the red flag signs and what are the red flag symptoms? That also we have seen. Then, what is the most common presenting symptom of a spinal involvement like this? What is the commonest symptom?
Sir, paresthesias.
Back pain.
Back
Back pain is 95% of patients with spinal lesion. They have a back pain, but all back pain is not spinal cord disease. Okay, so how do I elicit that? Valsalva maneuver, coughing, sneezing, and that Hermit sign, radicular pain, and motor deficits. If you have motor deficit and radicular pain, and then Valsalva, and then Hermit sign is positive, this back pain has a significance. It could be demanding an emergency imaging. So the disease is usually internationally classified as 3 types. What are those 3 types?
Sir.
Spinal disease, extramedullary disease is classified as 3 types. MSCC, international nomenclature. Metastatic spinal cord compression. That's what probably this patient has, I don't know. So metastatic spinal cord compression, it is not metastasis in this case, it is a schwannoma or whatever you said, a neuronoma is the reason. Benign tumor it looks like. So there's one thing called the metastatic spinal cord compression or benign spinal cord compression. BSCC, MSCC. What do we have here? BSCC, benign spinal cord compression. The second one I asked you is patient presents with fever and chill triggers, acute onset. This is called, the diagnosis is SCA. That is spinal epidural abscess. Spinal epidural abscess. Sometimes discitis, osteomyelitis also might present with tenderness and pain in the local area, but fever is not a feature. So one group of diseases are BSCC, benign spinal cord compression. MSCC, metastatic spinal cord compression. You will have evidence of disease elsewhere with metastasis. And then presenting acutely with pain, back pain, similar features and fever, it could be infective. That is, one is the SCA, which is spinal epidural abscess. Okay, and 75% of cases will have fever and low back pain, and worse with percussion. If you percuss on the spinal segment, patient will wince with that pain. And then discitis and osteomyelitis are also painful, but fever is usually not a feature. What is the third group of disease? First is the compression with a tumor, benign or malignant. Second one is an infection. The third one is called SEH, spinal epidural hematoma. SEH. Previously it was SEA, it is spinal epidural hematoma. Here, motor weakness, acute onset, bowel and bladder dysfunction is present because it is usually intramedullary. The hemorrhage is intramedullary. Radicular pain is uncommon because it is intramedullary. In SEH, it is more within the spinal cord and not outside the spinal cord. There will be two history points. There is a neuraxial anesthesia. That means they put some tube into the epidural space and give them analgesia. That could get an hemorrhage there, or there could be an anticoagulant use. These are the two important features in the history. What is the fourth syndrome that can occur? Spinal vascular syndromes. Anterior spinal artery thrombosis, posterior spinal artery thrombosis. Okay. Now classify the spinal syndromes: tumors, benign, malignant, BSCC, MSCC. Infections, spinal epidural abscess, discitis, osteomyelitis. SCH, because of hemorrhage and anticoagulant history, neuraxial analgesia will be there. More looks like intramedullary rather than extramedullary. And then fourth one is spinal artery syndromes. How many anterior spinal arteries are there?
One, sir.
One. How many posterior spinal arteries are there?
Two, sir.
Yeah. Which is the dominant artery which supplies, anterior or posterior?
Anterior, sir. By anterior
two-thirds of the spinal cord is supplied by the anterior spinal artery. And remaining 1/3, half by left and half by the right posterior spinal artery. Okay. So that is why posterior spinal artery syndromes will produce posterior column symptoms. Anterior spinal artery syndromes will have both the motor and sensory corticospinal tracts as well as spinal thalamic tracts are involved. So you have both motor and sensory. This one. MRI, the sensitivity of MRI is 93% and specificity is 97%. That means close to 100%. Even better will be gadolinium contrast enhanced MRI is the gold standard. Gadolinium contrast and enhanced MRI that studies the blood vessels also. Okay. Now, what is the treatment? What do? Don't do anything. Diagnose and put it in the exam. PGs will pass with that case, and then patient will be sent home. Is that?
No, sir. Surgical excision.
Huh?
Surgical excision of the tumor.
Why surgical? Always first surgery, is it? You are a medicine man. What do you do as a medical treatment?
Relief of symptoms.
So, because this patient has got a resectable disease, as you said, rightly the first choice would be surgery. Because it is a schwannoma or a neuronoma, it's benign, it is outside the spinal cord, better you do the excision. Right, agreed. But there are some, treatments like, conservative treatments, including physical treatment, limiting the high-risk physical activities, pain control, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, muscle relaxants, and epidural steroid injections can be tried as a conservative treatment. What are they? The physical exercises, limiting high-risk physical activities, pain control with NSAIDs, muscle relaxants, epidural steroids could be the treatments until the patient waits for the surgery or not willing for the surgery. Surgical decompression is essential in this particular case. Okay. So which patient benefits from surgery or not? There are several scales. Epidural spinal cord compression scale, ESCCS. Like there are several scales like that. Modified bar score. Okay. This is modified bar score, spinal metastatic score. These scoring techniques will tell which patient would benefit from treatment. What is the surgical treatment? In this case, it is excision.
Excision.
There is spinal compression due to other reasons. Laminectomy, okay, and then fusion, anterior laminectomy, posterior and lateral approaches also are there. These are some of the surgical treatments. In thoracic and lumbar regions, posterior approaches for decompression of the spine are preferred. In the cervical, anterior approach is preferred. Okay, if it is a cervical lesion, you do an anterior approach. If it is posterior and lateral approaches are the thoracic and the lumbar regions for the surgeon to access. They do discectomy, they do fusion, and they do laminectomy also. And so what is the differential diagnosis for a person coming with back pain and neurological complaints? What could be the differential diagnosis?
Sir, myelopathy, radiculopathy.
Yes, there are transverse myelitis, subarachnoid hemorrhage, aortic pathology, dissection, aneurysm, acute myocardial infarction also. But it comes with pain here, pain in the back, sudden excruciating pain. Acute myocardial infarction has to be excluded. What are the ascending syndromes which can produce myelopathy? And rather diffuse longitudinal syndromes. I don't say ascending, longitudinal syndromes versus transverse. What could be the longitudinal lesions of the spinal cord?
Sir,
ALS?
yes, sir, amyotrophic polio.
Guillain-Barré?
Guillain-Barré, poliomyelitis.
HIV myelopathy, poliomyelitis, any types of viral myelopathies? Botulism? Multiple sclerosis?
Multiple sclerosis.
You should be able to tell. So these are the ones which are ascending compared to a transverse level. This patient has got a transverse level. So we know a particular thing is happening at a particular level of the spinal cord. Whereas if the distribution is ascending, you must consider amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, Guillain-Barré, viral myopathies like any post-infective myelopathies, HIV, and then botulism, poliomyelitis, multiple sclerosis. These are all the possibilities. Sometimes viral transverse myelitis can present as not an ascending lesion, but a transverse lesion. Okay.
Yes.
What are the complications that can happen to this patient? If you don't treat her, what will happen?
Sir, complete paraplegia.
Yes, complete paralysis of the limbs occur.
Bowel and bladder.
Not able to walk, gait impairment, and typical sensory loss with all the problems of associated sensory loss, and fecal and urinary incontinence or retention. Both may be problems, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
So never forget the learning points today, the red flag signs, and all those things what we have discussed. It's a team approach. Physician, surgeon, orthopedician, neurosurgeon, everybody is involved in the care of a patient like this.
Yes.
Sudhir garu, namaskaram andi. Meer edaina cheppadaluchukunte add cheyandi sir.
Thank you so much. Chala bagundi sir mee talk. Very informative. Very informative. Unfortunately, our students are not. Ante nenu maatladanu kontamandi join ayyetapudiki.
మధ్యలో జాయిన్ అయ్యి నేను చూశాను. పిల్లలకి ఆ పర్టికులర్ సిమ్టమ్స్ ని బట్టి ఎలా వాళ్ళు డిసోసియేట్ చేసుకోవాలి, ఇంట్రామెడులరీ ఎలా ఉంటుంది, ఎక్స్ట్రా మెడులరీ ఎలా ఉంటుంది, ఎక్స్ట్రా డ్యూరల్ ఎలా ఉంటుంది, అసెండింగ్ ఎలా ఉంటాయి, ట్రాన్స్ఫర్స్ ఎలా ఉంటాయి, ఏవి రెడ్ ఫ్లాగ్ సైన్స్, క్లినికల్ సెన్స్ ఎలా ఎలిసిట్ చేయాలి, అవన్నీ డిఫరెంట్ స్పైనల్ సిండ్రోమ్స్, metastatic spinal compression, benign spinal compression, abscess, hemorrhage, and then transverse myelitis, spinal artery syndromes. All those things have to come.
Okay, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the opportunity, sir.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
PGs, any doubts you have, please question. You are always very, very silent spectators. You must be having some doubts, isn't it? Whom do you ask other than the teacher?
Sir, no doubt, sir.
What you have to do is, whenever the student is presenting, one of your students, co-student, on spinal compression, you must read in and through the topic. That means the depth of it and breadth of it. You must cover from the available books, like Dizong or Raymond Adams, or your brain neurology, or your Harrison, the basic book. You have to read the monograms. You can read De Jong, you can read Raymond Adams, very good book, or you can read any other standard neurology textbook, brain neurology, whatever it is, and then formulate an idea how to differentiate these things. And generate that reading will generate some doubts.